Good. All right. Hello, my name's Julien. I'm going to talk about finding humans to turn into developers, maybe for Perl or something else that doesn't really matter. Today's talk is about attracting and selecting people to train them as developers. I'm trying to explain how to figure out if someone has the right aptitude to be a developer, and to try and find the spark, as I like to call it. Like you want to see if there's a flame you can light, or an ember you can light into a flame. I've given a similar talk before, which was about mentoring. You might have seen that, and this one is sort of the prequel. So we're not going to talk about anything really technical. We're just going to talk about how to hire people, or how I hire people anyway. I'd like to ask you to hold questions till the end. I was hoping to have a discussion. There were not that many people. I think Curtis has drawn them all away. Can't blame him. If you want to go watch Curtis's talk, feel free to do that. If there's no one left, I'll join you. Anyway. Right, so let's just start with this show of hands. How often were you interviewed throughout your career? More than 100 interviews that you've attended as wanting a job? No one? More than 50? Anyone? No? More than 10? Okay, there are 2 people out of, what, 15? Less than 10. Yeah, that's probably, hopefully, all of us. Yeah, so I think I've had 4 or 5 interviews where I was being interviewed, and most of them were for my apprenticeship. And after that, if I went somewhere as a Perl developer, I usually then got hired. I think it's very hard to not get hired, at least in the countries where there's not a big Perl market anymore. But that's exactly the point. There's not a big Perl market, and we're going to talk about that. But how often have you interviewed anyone? Probably not that many. If we can do another show of hands, who's done more than 100 interviews? Yeah, not me. More than 50? Yeah, that's the same people anyway. There should be more hands coming up. But I reckon most of us have probably done a handful of interviews, if at all. And so technically, in general, like for technical people, interviewing is really hard because we don't get a lot of practice on it. Most technologies, and probably Perl is very typical for that, it's just the markets are very tight, and we just don't really do a lot of interviewing, and that's a skill you need to hone, and we're going to see if we can do that. But let me start with the company. So I work at Oleeo. That's a recruitment company, or recruitment software company in the south of London that's been around for about 20 years, a bit more now. It was one of the first movers in the hiring software market. Our product is called an applicant tracking system, or an ATS, and it's being used by large companies, banks, department stores, financial institutions to hire large volumes of graduates, and other things. So police forces, for example, use it as well. It's really good for very broad spectrum hiring and for complex hiring processes. The whole thing's built in Perl, and we're at our currently at the 3rd iteration of the product, which has been under development for a bit more than 11 years now in Catalyst. So that's the scene that we're talking about. South London, we're trying to hire developers, and we're trying to hire junior developers. But let's take a step back first and discuss whether we should train our own developers at all. And now, obviously, I can't tell you if you should do that or not, but I can try to help figuring out whether it makes sense. So why would you even train? So I mean, there are 2. Like there's this one thing that you can't find them because there's like just a way too small hiring pool for Perl, at least. If we think about Wimbledon, which is in South London, think about the tennis. That's a suburb. It's 45 minutes outside of the city centre of London. That means if you live in the north, you have an hour-and-a-half commute one way. That's 3 hours of your life every day. Who wants to do that? Not many, probably. And there are some companies in the city centre. So location is a really big factor, I think, for everyone to decide whether I want to work somewhere or not. And maybe you don't want to move just because you have a different job within the same city. Different city or a different country. That's what I did recently, moved from Germany to the UK. That's another story, but you don't really want to change where you live if you just take another job in the same city. So, small hiring pool. And unappealing location as well. That's what I just said. And obviously also people don't want to change their language. They have a preference, and that kind of contributes to the small hiring pool. So someone who's very comfortable in Python or PHP or Java doesn't really have a big incentive to switch to Perl. Because there are plenty of jobs for them already, and unless you're an amazing company and you can convince them to broaden their horizon, they're probably not going to do that, especially because it's not going to increase their employability, likely, just because the market for employers is just as small as for employees. So what can we do about that? Well, we can make our own, because if we look at graduates and in general at young people, a lot of them nowadays want to be developers. That can be for multiple reasons. For many of them, it's probably because they've heard that IT pays well. And that's not a bad reason. But on the other hand, it's also nice to find people whose reason is because they like technology or they are massive nerds, which is a good reason, I think, to work in tech. So new people usually don't have an opinion of Perl, which is mostly because they've never heard of it. I think Sawyer's trying to change that again, which is good. But at the moment, you're not going to scare applicants away because you're saying it's Perl, because they basically have never heard about it, and they are likely not going to care what language they will learn because they're happy to get one of the few developer jobs where they're being trained properly. So that's a good motivation. Essentially, that means they can't really be picky. If there are 100 or 1,000 applicants per actual junior or trainee role in a large city, you can't get to be picky. So that can work in our favor. But we need to kind of figure out first which level should we hire. And there are lots of different options here. We can go for people that come straight out of school, which is sort of what you probably do in Germany or in Austria with apprenticeships, where everything is organized into like a state-regulated system where they can go to a vocational school and they're being trained and paid at the same time in your company. That's good, but not every country has that. And also, of course, people that come straight out of school, they may be 18 years old, they might not be as mature, they might not have as much life experience. That's something to consider. On the other hand, you can get graduates, probably preferably from STEM subjects, so science, technology, and math. Not necessarily computer science. Doesn't have to be software engineering either. I think it's much more important to see how well the people are in terms of learning. So another thing that we've encountered recently is bootcamp graduates. So these things, especially in technology hubs, cities that have lots of startups and lots of IT companies, they have a lot of these bootcamps where people learn about front-end technologies. And those can churn out good candidates, but you have to be careful about them. And we'll look at how to evaluate them in a bit. Then you can go for junior developers that already have work experience. That can be 1 or 2 years of already working, but you have to be careful here because they will probably have worked in a different technology. And if you've got someone who's been working in Python for 2 years or in Ruby for 2 years, how likely is it that they will want to stick with Perl? Even if you're attracting them with the whole training thing, they have just completed 1 or 2 years of learning and getting to know their language, and now you ask them to learn a different one, and there are going to be lots of hurdles that they just overcome once, and they're just at the stage where they're happy that they can now finally do stuff, and now you're just pushing them down again. So people will likely go the path of least resistance and just go work somewhere else where they can use what they already know. There's no incentive really. And then there are career changes. People who have already got lots of experience in the workforce, but possibly not in IT. And in my experience, that's the ones who have the most motivation to actually go into tech, because they're taking a step that's quite risky, and they kind of stop their life, set everything aside, and start over, probably taking a loss at the same time. So they have a very good incentive to actually get into the game. Yeah, but you have to decide for yourself, essentially. So once we've decided we want to train and hire, we need to make some proper preparations. Most important thing is to come up with a clear interview process. That means you should think about the steps you're going to go through when you hire, what kind of interviews, what kind of questions are you going to ask them. You need to write down exactly what the role you're hiring for is going to do. Think about that, think about what problems they're going to solve, what kind of contributions they're going to make in the beginning. Think about how they can progress after they've been hired, after they've been there for half a year, 2 years. Think about whether you want to keep them or you just want relatively cheap people that will do entry-level things. That's questions you need to ask yourself. Also, what technologies they're going to work with. You need to, or you should, definitely come up with a work contract right at the beginning. Make sure that it's all agreed on, that the management agrees with it, and that you don't have to go and, oh, we forgot to draft a contract when you've made a decision, because then people might walk away getting different offers somewhere else. And you also need to agree on the budget. So how much are they going to earn? How much is it going to cost us on the side to hire or to employ someone else? How much is it going to cost us to invest someone else's time into the training, and how long is it going to take to return something and break even? And also, how much is the hiring going to cost us? These questions definitely need answering beforehand. And I believe what's probably the most important is that you need to decide whether you absolutely have to fill this role now, or in case you don't get any really good candidates that stand out enough, are you fine to just start over later and try again and just not fill the role right now? That can mean the difference between getting a mediocre candidate or getting the best candidate. And a mediocre candidate can cost you quite a lot of money. So you should think about that. So let's set some expectations. There are 3 parts of the company that need to be prepared for us having a trainee developer. There's the team. They need to have an open mind, because they're going to need lots of patience. There's going to be this very young person that's possibly very new to the workforce as well. And they're going to ask so many questions, and they're going to be frustrated and slow, and they're going to need loads of help, and you need buy-in from the whole tech team. Otherwise, they're going to be really frustrated. People need to be willing to work with the fresh hires, with the are you all right? Okay. Yeah, they need to be willing to help. And if they don't have that, it doesn't really make sense to bring on fresh people or like untrained people. Management needs to know that training is an additional job. It's not something that someone does on the side and the rest will just happen on its own. This will eat someone's time. And management needs to be aware of that and needs to schedule and plan accordingly. And management also needs to be aware of the fact that it will take some time until there's going to be a return on that investment of time and money. And then there are the stakeholders, at least if you are doing in-house software, or the people selling your product, if you're selling a product that you're making. For them, it's going to mean they're going to have more discussions, there are going to be more detailed questions, they're going to have to think a lot more about what they want, because the new people will simply not have the experience yet to question them or to figure out what the stakeholders want. But on the other hand, it also means, and that's something that's really good, management is probably going to schedule more of the low priority features and the things that usually don't get done. So for stakeholders, trainee developers are great, because they're going to do all of the things that just were left in the backlog. So usually in my experience, the business people actually really like working with junior developers, because they're going to pick up all of the things that otherwise would never have been done. Good. So now we know what to expect. Let's see, where are we going to look for this? Maybe we're going to use some job portals like LinkedIn. That's kind of obvious, I guess. There are lots of them. It depends kind of in what country, what locale you are. Most of them cost something. For junior roles, Stack Overflow might work. It might give you too many candidates, depending on your location. But it might, on the other hand, also target the wrong people. Because if you want to go really low level of training and existing knowledge, then maybe Stack Overflow is the wrong place because they wouldn't think about looking there. But LinkedIn and all of the other ones, like in Germany it might be Monster or Indeed or whatever, all of those are great. Then there's government job agencies, if your country has those, like the German Arbeitsamt. Most people that look for an apprenticeship in Germany will go there first. And I find mine there, and it worked out okay, I guess. So yeah, that works definitely, but not every country has this or has it to a point where people actually use it for this kind of job. Then there are tech mentoring events, and I really like those. There are lots of organizations in large cities now that will just run, not boot camps, but tech meetups where people that want to get into IT can show up and ask questions or bring their things that they're working on, and they get paired with some volunteers. And then the volunteers just help them and mentor them. I do that, and it's great, and I tremendously enjoy it. One of the trainees I previously hired used to go to one of them, and I went along to see it, and I really enjoy it now. And I think it's a good place to find the motivated people, because only people who are really motivated and really want that kind of career change will go to these events. Well, and obviously people who just want to learn tech, but then they're not going to be the ones that will look for opportunities anyway. Well, and then there are graduate hire organizations. They're a little bit like headhunters, but for people fresh out of university, at least in the UK and in Ireland, those exist. I'm not so sure about other countries. They're all right, but you need to be aware that you're not going to have this direct communication with the candidate as much. So there's going to be an agent in between, and you need to kind of deal with that. Good. So we've now figured out where to get candidates from. Let's look at interviewing. Did I go back? No, I did not. Sorry. So what do we look for? First of all, there are technical skills and there are soft skills. The technical skills aren't that important at the beginning, because you're going to train them in them. So it doesn't really matter what programming language they've learned in university or what technology they've really worked with. In my experience, software engineering or computer science degree with a few semesters of Java or math people with R, they're not going to know much programming. They're going to know how to solve these specific tasks. They're going to be very proficient in copy and pasting from Stack Overflow. They're probably, if they've done Java or something, they're going to know how to add all the changes to Git and then commit them with a click of a button. But yeah, all of these don't really matter because in just a few weeks, you've basically taught them all of that. So don't really look for that. Look at their projects if they have them, but don't think, okay, they have to have done this specific language in uni. It doesn't matter at all. At least it doesn't to me. So STEM background's good because that means they've been working with subjects where they had to use analytical thinking, they had to solve problems, but it doesn't mean that someone who's got a degree in English literature or in German or in something completely unrelated isn't suited to be a developer. They've completed university, maybe with a good degree. That means at least they're grown up and self-sufficient, so that's great. Yeah, but having some development experience is probably useful because it shows that they actually want to do that job. So I wouldn't hire someone who just decided today they want to be a developer and that's it. But everyone needs to decide that for themselves, really. So, but soft skills. The most important one really is the ability to learn, which is something we can interview for. And then there's an interest in development, that as I've already said. Pragmatism is important because you don't want them to just get stuck and try to solve something until they go home and then get frustrated. Sometimes they just need to get stuff done. Attention to detail is something we can very nicely look at, for example, in CVs and in interviews. Critical thinking is super important. Again, there can be some questions in interviews that we can go for. Just as with problem-solving skills. Motivation, I've said that before, I'll say it a couple more times during this talk, is probably the most important thing you need. And again, someone who is looking to change their careers or someone who's already working on programming in their own time is going to be much more intrinsically motivated than someone who's just completed a software engineering degree and who is going to say, hey, this is going to pay me lots of money, I'm going to have a career in IT. So you need to figure out how motivated the candidates are. And then finally there's the spark, this thing, this excitement, this, you know, you talk to them and they start telling you about their project at home and they pick up a problem and they just want to figure it out, and if they can't, they'll do it anyway. That's the kind of person that you really want to hire. And the only way to see if someone has this is if you give them concrete problems either during their interview or later on when you bring them in for trial day, which we're going to talk about in a second. But how do we actually do that? Well, first of all, there's a cover letter or questions that you might have in your applicant tracking system. So ask for their motivation, ask for their life experiences, that kind of thing. Then there's their CV. Now, everyone's got that, and I mean, it has their education, it has the kinds of jobs they've already had. Yeah, that makes sense. We can look at that, we can see what we can learn from it. We can also look for spelling mistakes and all of these other tiny things, the attention to detail. Are they using bullet points and dashes and all of them mixed, and is there lots of extra white space and things like that? Someone like that is probably not going to have a very good attention to detail later. At least that's what I look for. Well, and then what kind of degree do they have? Where is it from? In some organizations that's important, in others it's not. I think it's good to have people on the hiring team that find this really important and others that just want the individual to be well suited, and then you can have a healthy discourse about it. But I think it probably shouldn't be the deciding factor. At least that's my personal opinion. If they've got some code online on GitHub or GitLab or similar, ask for it. It's the best way to see this early on and to filter people out is to just have that in your application form. If you have a GitHub account, put this here. But if you don't worry, you don't have to have it. Always tell them it's not required, because no one has the time to actually do open source. There's only a handful of us, and probably that's the people that are now in this room, or probably more the other room in Curtis's talk. But most of us, or most of people in general, don't actually have the time to do this. So you can't require this. And I believe that's true for hiring on a senior level as well. It should never be required, because like a lot of people have other commitments in their life, and that's just as important. Good. So first step is screening the applications we've got. So at this stage, hopefully, we've got lots of them. If you don't, you can probably skip some of the steps I'm going to go through. But first of all, you want to screen them. So who's going to do that? That could be the hiring manager. For the people unfamiliar with that term, that is the technical person in charge of the hire, or the HR, human resources person. So both can really screen applications, or you can have the whole team screen applications. And it's important to explain buzzwords and technology names and things to everyone involved, because people of HR might not know what specific technical terms, specific technologies might mean, or which ones are similar, which ones mean the same. And on the other hand, people that like only work in tech, when they screen CVs, they might not know how university courses differ from each other, what the grades mean. I had to learn how the English grading system in university works. There are different ones apparently, and everyone uses a different way of putting their grades down, and coming from Germany, that was very confusing to me. So that's definitely important. Then you have to be objective, and you have to treat everyone the same. Take your time when you screen the CVs. Only screen a handful. Don't do like 50 in a day. You're going to tire out, and then you're going to not be objective anymore. And remember the role description. You have to commit to that. Don't let anyone through because they look okay, and the application looks okay, but they're actually not a good fit. They might be a good fit for another role you have. They might be super senior. Yeah, that's great. If they're awesome, we can hire them, but not for the trainee role. And then you need to keep that into account. Right. So you want to look at how they answer the questions you've asked or what they've written in their cover letter. You want to see what kind of education they have, what kind of previous jobs they have. You can learn a lot from that. Have they worked in a supermarket and overseen people? Are they in a sports club and are competing at a semi-professional level, at club level? All of these things, they all tell us something. Team sports are great. Helping people in university is great. That kind of thing shows they're good at teamwork. Personal interests, like, I don't know, for a developer role, maybe home automation with like Arduino or something is probably a good hobby to have for someone who wants to be a professional developer. But again, you don't have to have that. It just shows that that person is going to be more motivated than others might be. And then we probably have to reject someone at this stage because there's going to be this big pile of virtual CVs, and we need to make that smaller. The whole interview process should be like a funnel that gets smaller and smaller. So I believe at this stage, we need to look for the ones that are really too weak. That could mean then they're either not interested in the role, or they have a really badly written CV, or they have no education and don't demonstrate any knowledge at all. Or it could also mean that because we're hiring on a very junior level, we can hire locally. There are lots of applicants locally, and so hiring someone from far abroad who will need a work visa does probably not make a lot of sense for junior role. Like, there are going to be lots of graduates in our own town, maybe in our own country. Getting someone who has to come from abroad, who needs relocation help, who needs the visa sponsorship, just doesn't make sense here. It makes sense for senior, it's great, but for someone straight out of uni, that's going to be a waste of time for your company and for the applicant. So these would be the ones I'd filter out. Then next step, and this could be skipped if there are not a lot of candidates, the telephone screen. That makes sense because we can learn more about how the candidate actually behaves, at least on the phone. We can hear more about their motivation. I believe that could either be the hiring manager again or HR. In our company, HR is doing those, and I would say that typically HR people have more experience in doing this. So yeah, they're good way to filter out candidates who are not interested in the role but didn't properly convey that in text. If they can't answer any questions at all, that's probably a sign that they're not going to be very good talking to people either, and like talking is a very important thing in our work. And then you have to rate them somehow, and you filter out the ones that are just weaker than the rest. Make sure your interview is time boxed and sort of short, like 20 minutes max. Always ask the same questions. Ask about what they've done so far with their life, how their education played out, why they picked it, why they want to be a developer. That's a recurring question, really. And what they expect from the role, like why did they pick this role, like why did they apply here, and what do they think they'll gain from it. So now we've filtered down, and we'll come to the actual interview. In-person interview, maybe an hour. What I like to do is have the candidates do a short presentation first. So we always give them a kind of homework. We ask them, when you come in, please prepare a 10-minute presentation about something you like. Doesn't have to be technical. It could be your hobby, could be your sports club, your last holiday, your honeymoon. We don't care. As long as it's something that you can talk about for 10 minutes, prepare a presentation or something, because that will show us how they behave when they're really motivated and they know a lot about the subject. And whether they can explain it to someone who doesn't know anything about it, which is a large part of your daily life as a developer, especially when you talk to stakeholders or users. So a lot of people that I've seen have done university projects, but there were also a lot that did their sports club or just something they're generally interested in, like I don't know, pollution or robotics or the ethical questions of AI. It really doesn't matter, and I never judge on the base of what they're talking about, but I do judge a little bit on how well they are prepared. So then you ask everyone the same things, obviously, as you prepare a set of questions. Questions that are relevant to the role and that include a technical discussion. You should best have a pool of questions, because if you're interviewing people with different backgrounds, They might have different technologies in their CV, and some of them might have not encountered any of the technologies that you're going to use. So what I like to do is have something about object orientation, something about databases, something about front end, and then I can just draw off this pool, and when they get stuck, I can help them. And that's the real interview, where I try to help them and lead them through the questions. And even if they've never seen a database before and they don't know what relations are, if they figure it out with my help, that means they can actually work with me and I can mentor them. And if that doesn't work, they're not the right candidate. Yeah, so you want language unspecific questions. In a senior interview, you might ask an obscure feature of Perl. Probably don't. That's not relevant to the job, but you might. That doesn't make sense if you ask someone who's never even seen Perl before. Right. Then there are also questions about the person itself, the person themselves and the person's future. Not where do you see yourself in 5 years. The answer to that should probably be in your company progressing, but that's not like a really relevant question. But things like how do you organize yourself? What kind of challenges have you faced in the past, and how have you overcome them? How do you use your explain us something like a incident where you used your initiative, something like that. Those are good unspecific open questions. Always let them talk, never give them concrete yes or no questions. So here you want to reject the ones that can't pick up on all the technical stuff. If you can't teach them anything, they're not going to be a good trainee. So you have to get rid of them. And if they have different expectations, either salary-wise or of what they want to learn, then they're probably not a good fit either. If you're looking for a back-end developer and they keep talking about React, it might be they're not going to be happy in your company, so it's best to not waste their time and yours and your money. And always remember, interviewing takes a lot of practice. So this is a skill that you need to learn. Interview questions. You always want to ask them open-ended questions, as I've said. Tell them that it's okay if they don't know the answer. So I'm going to show you this printout of a database, and I'm going to ask you, imagine this list of songs and artists would be the back end of a music search. And do you think this is a good way of organizing this data? And maybe someone is going to say, hey, this is like an unnormalized relational database. I'm going to draw this diagram and then I'm done. Yeah, great. Ask them something else. But others will say, let me see. And then there's going to be a 10-minute discussion where you lead them to the answer. And you might want to point out that, oh, there are several rows that have the same artist. And what could that mean? And you want to always ask leading questions to help them along the way. And that's how you can see whether they transfer skills and whether they transfer knowledge and whether they can pick up on hints rather than just be told something. And I find that's a very important skill for learning. So yeah, guide them through. Great. Now we've interviewed a few people and we've made a few hard choices, and there are maybe 2 or 3 left, and now we want to trial them. That's the last interview step in my case. A trial day. For the applicant, it means they get to be a developer for a day. Maybe they're straight out of university. Maybe they're going to be a career changer. So they've never actually sat in an office, and they don't know what it's like to just work as a developer. So they can try this out. They can work on some real tasks. They can learn about the company. They can get a feeling for whether they like the environment, and they get to know you, the mentor. For the company, on the other hand, it shows you first, and I'm not kidding, whether they can handle a computer. Are they tech savvy at all? Do they have basic office skills? Can they behave in an office? Can you build rapport with them? And can you actually teach them something? So in the interview you saw a little bit of this, but if you have them for a whole day, it's much easier to tell whether they can actually be taught anything at all. Yeah. There are some pitfalls. You should never give an interviewee actual real work. It should feel like real work, but they're not there to do your tickets for free. And that holds true, in my opinion, for all kinds of interviews. And certainly there should be a take-home test, because you're not going to learn anything from that. That's not the right way. They're not free workforce, and you have to respect their time. Some people might have another job, and some people might need that job and can't take time off. So don't abuse this for free work. That's very important to me. But how do we trial day? You should come up with something realistic. Think about something that resembles your actual product and make it suit your business. Write some real tickets for it and provide tickets at different difficulty levels. Really simple ones, really complex ones. And make sure to tell the interviewee that they don't have to complete all of them, and you're not going to judge how they complete them, because you're aware that they might not have worked with this technology or that technology. So it's not about judging their skills, it's judging their abilities. That's what you're doing. Seeing whether they enjoy doing what you want them to do. What I like to do is take them out to lunch, to a restaurant, take someone from the team along, and see whether they get along, whether they can chat to each other and they, don't just hate each other. That would be a bad candidate probably, or bad hire. So I find that good, and also include them in stuff like if you are going to do a tea round in your office, which in the UK is apparently common, make sure that they're being included, that it feels inclusive to them, that they feel comfortable in the office. The way I like to do this is I will usually have very simple code, very easy product. There is a Git repository that has some history. There's usually a GitLab, and I prepare a virtual machine that I can just save and reset and just redo the whole thing for every candidate. And then they're going to get a computer, going to sit them down, explain to them, here, this is what I want you to do. Here's a README. You need to do these steps, and then we'll talk about each ticket individually. You can you can do pull requests, merge requests, and we're going to take a look at your code together every time. And if you get stuck, I'm over there. Just come and ask me. Also, very important, when they come to your office, tell them about the dress code, because if it's a t-shirt environment, you do not want them to show up in a suit or similar office smart business wear, because they're going to feel really uncomfortable. They're probably not going to be used to wearing it, and it's just going to make their day hell. So tell them way in advance. Here's some examples for tickets I like to use. So in my case, there's a simple Dancer 2 app. It has a few pages. It has one form, and it has a simple one-table SQLite database. The tickets range from change some forms, change some templates in the front end, maybe even just change a word, and then you can see whether they figure out how to find the right file on their own in an unknown code base, up to copy and pasting some JavaScript and some Perl code, where it's important again that they don't have to write new code in a technology they've never seen before. But if something equals this, then push something in a list of errors. They can copy this and adapt it to make something work. And that's totally okay. And I believe anyone who's written any code before will be able to adapt this in most languages. So that's fine, but you can't expect someone to write a bunch of new code. So HTML, CSS is good for that. And also some Git. Make sure to explain that the commit messages should be the same way as the old ones. Show them how to browse the existing code, things like that. There are lots of tiny details where you can help them along the way that will make them feel more comfortable, and that will also give them a realistic impression of what it's like to work with you. Right, so we have now decided for someone, and as I've said earlier, if we haven't found anyone who's right, who feels right, then maybe we don't want to hire anyone at all. And maybe we just want to wait a little bit longer and get another round of interviewees, because a mediocre hire might cost us a lot more in the long run. But we found someone, now we're making an offer. It's very important to be fair here and to offer a sufficient amount of money. If you're going to hire several ones, you probably want to all pay them the same. Otherwise, they're going to talk about it, and then one of them is going to feel bad, or someone else is going to feel superior. You probably do not want this. So you want to also give them a deadline for them to respond. So probably not longer than a week, because otherwise other candidates that might come in second might run away and sign somewhere else. So that's bad, and then you'll end up with no one if they reject your offer. And also remember that they might have multiple offers as well. So if you take too long, they might go away. So never wait too long. Great, so someone signed, and we're now on our first day and the onboarding. You have to tell them when to be there and where to go. And you should probably have their desk ready. It's really discouraging if you show up in the company and then no one knows that you're there and there's no desk and we're going to put you, I don't know, maybe over there in the corner for now. That's not a good feeling, and you don't want them to have that on their very first day, because you will likely want them to stay with you for a long time. Tell the team they're coming, explain the role they're going to do, and manage expectations for the team and also for the new hire. Sit down with them, tell them what what's going to happen, what is the first week going to be like, what do you want from them, what do they want from you, and especially give them something real to do on their first day. Don't just make them fill out forms. They can do those at home. You can send them earlier and they can put in their national insurance number when they're at home. You don't have to waste your first day on that. Just make sure they have something meaningful to do. Maybe they can shadow you. Maybe they can click the deploy button. Maybe they can solve a simple ticket and then I can go to production, and they're going to feel like they've actually added some value on their first day, and that will boost their morale tremendously. What happens after, though? We have now introduced them to the role. We've had them for a few weeks, for a few months. Are they happy? We should regularly talk to them about their performance. There should be something that's set up in advance every week, maybe every Monday or every Tuesday or maybe every Friday. Have like a 10-minute talk, just very informal, but make sure you go to a meeting room, close the door, because you don't want to talk about performance in front of the team, although you will talk to them every day, hopefully multiple times, but not about how they're doing. So that should be something behind the closed door. Write down how they progress and take their feedback every time. If they're unhappy with something, if they want to focus on something else especially, you should listen to them, because feedback always goes both ways. If they ask for a plan, you should better have one. Not every role and not every product allows to have a very stringent plan, but at least some kind of feeling of progression makes a lot of sense and goes a long way. So yeah, you just want to make sure that they're happy so that they don't run away. Thank you very much. Any questions? Lots. Okay, let's start over there.
On which step do you think it's right to say to the people what they will do? For example, you came to the university, to the students, and say, hey, we're a big company, industrial leaders, we do a lot of crazy things like machine learning, big data. They are all excited, they want to work for you, but then you say, but you will prepare.
Okay, so the question was, at which step do you tell your candidates what their actual job is going to be? So if you're like a big machine learning company, when do you tell them that their job is actually going to be Perl development and not machine learning? Because that's what the data scientists do. So I think that should be made clear in the job description that they will find online or in the university. So,
But they know nothing about Perl.
well, it will say it's backend development, focusing on backend technologies, databases, things like that. It can be vague, but if you want them to do data science, then you will say that you're going to do data science. And there's a difference between backend development and data science. And also for a data science role, most of the people that will apply to you will be math people and people with master's degrees in data science. So I think there is a difference. But of course, when you talk to them, like you want them to ask questions at any stage, and you should answer those questions at any stage. I tend to explain the role and the tech stack in more detail in the actual 1-hour personal interview. So at that stage, but also it can be on the phone interview. So, and if they keep talking about data science, then in the phone interview you can slow them down and tell them, well, actually, we do this, but in this role you're going to be the product that uses all of the things that fall out of the data science. So that's when I would do that. You need to manage expectations. Does that answer it?
Yeah,
All right, great. Yeah?
First one, how do you alleviate the, because I think recently just a concern, that's a lot of newbies and young guys have, around Perl is becoming less and less used, so this is going to be a less and less relevant skill. That's the question I always seem to get is, do I want to start my career off in Perl?
So the question was, how do you
alleviate those?
Yeah, how do you alleviate young people not wanting to start their career with a technology that is being perceived as not much growing or wanted at the moment? Yes, a great question. In my experience, most of them will not have heard about it at all. So out of the most recent batch, we've just had about 100 applicants, out of which we interviewed, I believe, 20 on the phone, and then eventually had 5 or 6 in for interview and 3 in for the trial day. Out of those, 2, I believe, had looked up Perl because it said that in my CV when we have my LinkedIn profile, basically in the job description where it says you're going to have a personalized mentoring thing going on with this guy. And then there's my LinkedIn profile and it says I do Perl, and then some people look me up and find these talks on YouTube, and then they might be curious, hopefully they might be curious and look up what Perl is and come prepared, but most unfortunately don't, actually, in my experience. And when we were hiring for a dedicated backend role, there were a few more that had looked it up, but most of them hadn't gone up to the point that they thought, oh, this technology is being perceived as old and, you know, on a dying out kind of path in the industry. No, but they would have figured out that there are not a lot of jobs with it, but there's not the sort of like black humor you would get from someone who's a senior developer in a different language. But in my experience, I'd say I will answer those questions with telling them that, well, a year ago, a company headhunted me from a different country to come here and do this job, so I think it's still working. And I am pretty sure that the companies that use it professionally cannot just change their million of lines of code bases overnight. So there are going to be plenty of years where there's still enough jobs, and there are a lot of developers that will slowly go towards retirement, so there is going to be a need. And even if that is going, like, even if there are not that many anymore, you will encounter lots of other technologies to work with, and you can, you're going to do front end as well, you're going to do databases as well. There's always a path to go, and Perl is one of these technologies that is really good as a base to pick up others. All right, I think we're out of time. If there are no more questions, thank you very much for listening. I hope this was useful.